Okay, now we're working. The chat is working. Um, Back to the Vince McMahon documentary docu series once again, part three. Um, where I left off yesterday was King of the Ring 1994, explaining how Vince McMahon was starting to introduce the concept of the new generation. The the idea that guys like Hulk Hogan and guys like Macho Man Randy Savage, who Macho Man was still with the company at this time, but he was an announcer, right? And Vince McMahon wanted to keep him as an announcer, even though he wanted to wrestle. He was an announcer. He was an announcer on this show. But the irony of it was the main event for King of the Ring 1994 was not the King of the Ring tournament, which ended between Owen Hart and Razor Ramon, two new generation stars, but between Jerry the King Lawler and Roddy Piper. Now, Roddy Piper, there's nobody more synonymous with the golden age of the WWF than Roddy Piper, the first big heel of the Vince McMahon Jr. era. And Jerry Lawler, while he wasn't in the WWF during that time, he didn't come to the WWF until 1993. He was in Memphis, and he was AWA champion in the 80s. And he had the legendary feud with Andy Kaufman in the early 80s. So these guys are veterans in the game. Lawler started in the 70s in Memphis, pretty much never went anywhere else. Roddy Piper started off in Saskatchewan, Western Canada, pretty much wrestled all over the West Coast, both in Canada and in the United States, in Los Angeles, and mainly in Portland, before going to the Carolinas in the early 80s, having the chain match with Greg Valentine, and then on the first Starrcade, and then being contacted by Vince McMahon to come up to New York to feud with Hulk Hogan, to be Hogan's foil for uh, the angle at WrestleMania 1. So, but Piper was synonymous with this era. So they're talking about this era is old. They're talking about the Iron Sheik is old. They're talking about Hulk Hogan is old. They're talking about Macho Man is old. But the main event for King of the Ring 1994 is Piper and Jerry Lawler. A horrible match, by the way. The match sucked. Like, they had amazing chemistry on the microphone. Piper had his bottom line show, and Jerry Lawler had the King's Court. But their in-ring chemistry wasn't great. Piper looked great; he was in great shape, but the chemistry just wasn't there. But anyway, but the point is not necessarily to move away from the older stars, but to get at Hogan, because Hogan is going to appear, like I said, the following month at Bash of the Beach 1994, which is really the first Bash of the Beach ever, because the previous year's event, when they had Sid and Vader versus the British Bulldog and Sting, it was Beach Blast. It wasn't Bash of the Beach, it was Beach Blast. So the first Bash of the Beach ever, and Hogan is going to challenge Ric Flair for the now united WCW championship, because what happened was, of course, Ric Flair was the champion in 1991. He defeats Tatsumi Fujinami. Then he leaves to go to the WWF. He brings the big gold belt with him because The NWA didn't give him his $25,000 deposit. The NWA, well, WCW at that time, sues WWE and Vince McMahon for copyright infringement. They have to use the tag belts, and then they just abandon the whole storyline of Ric Flair being the real world champion and have him win the Royal Rumble in '92. But during that time, when he's in the WWF, WCW needs a title belt. So they hold the title up for grabs, and then they bring over Dusty Rhodes, one of Dusty Rhodes' old Florida Championship Wrestling titles, to put it on Luger, as Luger defeats Barry Windham in one of the worst WCW pay-per-views of all time, the Great American Bash, 1991, and Luger turns heel. So now they have two championships, because WCW at this time is still a member of the NWA. And as a matter of fact, under Bill Watts' administration, they hold an NWA tournament via Battle Bowl in 1992, crowning Muta, the Great Muta, as the new NWA champion after he wins Battle Bowl. But now Ric Flair has come back. Ric Flair comes back, Super Brawl 3. It's a match between Barry Windham and the Great Muta. And Ric Flair says he will challenge the winner. Barry Windham wins the NWA Championship from Muta at that event. And then in Beach Blast, that same event I was talking about, Beach Blast 93, Ric Flair defeats Barry Windham to become the champion. Now, Eric Bischoff, he plans to take the belt off Flair. But he started doing WCW tapings, moving them out of the CNN Center in Atlanta, moving them down to Disney MGM Studios. Because through the connection of Mike Graham, he got connections with Disney, right? Because Mike Graham has a lot of pool in Florida. So he figured it would be cost effective, so they'll do the tapings there. So when they do the tapings there, they have to tape several months in advance. And they have the chance to they have the idea to put the belt on Rick Rude. Rick Rude has an upcoming match with Ric Flair at the Great American Fall Brawl in 1993, in which Rude will win the championship. So they put the belt on Rude before he actually wins it. He wins it in September. But if you were at the TV taping, you already saw him with the NWA championship. So the cat's out of the bag, who's going to win, right? So the NWA promoters, particularly Bill Watts at this time, was on the NWA board. And I think Jim Cornette was on the NWA board too at that time, because he was running Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and Smoky Mountain Wrestling recognized the NWA champion too, right? They disagree with this. First of all, they don't trust Rick Rude. They don't want Rick Rude with the belt. That was an Eric Bischoff call in WCW. And they don't like the fact that of taping several months in advance, where you have to have the wrestler come out to the live crowd with the belt. They think that's a breach of kayfabe. So they decide, they being Eric Bischoff and WCW, that we're going to leave the NWA. WCW doesn't need the NWA anymore. We're not going to recognize the NWA champion. So now Rude is the champion, but what to call the title? They go through several different variations. The international title, the big gold belt, what have you. Finally, they settle on the international title. And Rude is the champion, but he's about to put his championship up against Sting at Spring Stampede 1994. And Vader and Harley Race comes out and says that Vader will face the winner. So Sting wins through accidentally. Harley Race hits Rick Rude and costs him the match, and Sting wins, and Sting becomes the international champion. But since Hogan is coming in, Hogan wanted a unified championship, not the international championship and the WCW championship. One was held by Ric Flair and the other was held by Sting, right? So at Clash of Champions, they have Sting versus Ric Flair. Now during this match, Sherry, who is she's just left, um, she's just left ECW. She was in WWF for a while. She had a short feud with Luna as a babyface. She came out, as many people recall, into Tatanka's corner. It was supposed to be Marty Jannetty at WrestleMania 9, but it ended up being Tatanka. She came out in his corner as his corner woman, against Luna. And they had a scuffle on Raw, she and Luna, but drug problems got to her, and Vince McMahon had, of course, under fire for the federal government. Vince McMahon had to let her go in '93. Then she went to ECW. She managed Shane Douglas for a while, but now she's in WCW, and she's been in the audience. She's been scouting different wrestlers. She's looking for a talent to manage, her first talent. I was going to change it, Lisa. I was going to change it. Lisa. And since she was a babyface in when she left, not a lot of people got ECW, only like in the Northeast, and it was late at night. So, no, thank you. It was late at night, so I mean, people didn't really see it. Last time they saw her in mainstream wrestling, she was on WWF and she was a babyface. So she decides to come out as a babyface again, wearing Sting's makeup in the Sting and Ric Flair match. It was all set up. She turns on Sting. And Ric Flair is now your unified WCW champion with the big gold belt once again. The little Vader era WCW champion, Vader Lex Luger era WCW championship is put off to the side, never to be seen again, and that WCW title becomes the model for the WCW championship from then on. And even the World Heavyweight, in 2002, when they brought the World Heavyweight championship back, Eric Bischoff, the GM on Monday Night Raw, gives it to Triple H because they do the brand split, and Brock Lesnar, who's the undisputed champion at that time, signs exclusively with SmackDown. So Raw needs a champion, and Eric Bischoff decides to hand it to Triple H and make him the World Heavyweight Champion. He becomes the first WWE World Heavyweight Championship using the big gold belt. Even now, in 2022, when they decided, 22-23, when they decided to, Roman unified the Universal Championship and the WWE Championship together, and they decided to bring back a second championship. The model for the championship is like the big gold belt. So the legacy of the big gold belt lives on in the world of professional wrestling. But anyway, that's a beside the point statement. The point is they want to put down Hulk Hogan because he's going for the WCW championship at Bash at the Beach in Orlando. Like I said, huge event. Mr. T is there. Shaq is there. Chris Lemon, his co-star on Thunder in Paradise, Hogan's co-star, is there. And it's the biggest buy rate any WCW pay-per-view ever has done since WCW started doing pay-per-views, right? In '83, they started before WWE. But Vince still has to disparage them. And again, like I said, with Randy Savage, the same thing happens with Randy Savage. His contract comes up. And in the documentary, they show this. They show the Raw, because Randy Savage was the co-host of Monday Night Raw along with Vince McMahon a lot, or when Vince was going through his trial, sometimes with Jim Cornette, sometimes with Shawn Michaels, by different guys. And Macho Man was the voice of Raw originally when Raw first started in January of '93. So one day Vince McMahon just gets on TV and says Randy Savage is no longer with the WWF, and he bids Savage farewell. Now, what they don't get into is the alleged rumor. The alleged rumor, many wrestling fans know this rumor. The rumor is that the reason why Randy Savage was fired from the WWF in 1994 was because he had sexual relations with Stephanie McMahon, Vince's daughter, when she was 14 years old. And Vince found out about it. But apparently Vince didn't find out about it until much, much later, they say. So him leaving WWF to go to WCW didn't make much sense. They don't bring this. They bring this up passing in the documentary. They gloss over it completely. Apparently, from what I've heard, from what I've always been told, in 1996, remember in '96, guys, when Randy Savage was feuding with a heel Hulk Hogan, Halloween Havoc '96, and they finally beat him, the NWO, and then Roddy Piper comes out, and then Roddy Piper is now in WCW. And you don't hear from Randy Savage at all. There were rumors, and on WWF TV, it was in Madison Square Garden, Survivor Series '96. There was supposed to be a surprise tag team partner on the team of the baby faces that The Rock was on, that taking Jake the Snake Roberts was on, Yokozuna at his heaviest at that time was on. It was supposed to be a surprise veteran of the WWF returning. It ended up being Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and it was a complete letdown. But on the hotlines, the WWF hotline at that time, they were talking about a legend, and it was supposed to be Randy Savage. Randy Savage was going to leave WCW and come back to WWE. But apparently this was when the affair was brought up that he had sex with Stephanie. And Vince was so upset about it that he said he prohibited Macho Man's name from ever being mentioned on WWF TV ever again. So Savage ends up in January of 1997, ends up going back to WCW and turning heel and joining the NWO, and he begins one of the best years he's ever had in the latter half of his career, when he actually makes DDP into a legend at that year's Spring Stampede. Like DDP versus the Macho Man in '97 was what propelled DDP into the superstar status that he later became. You know what I mean? Randy Savage made DDP, and DDP will tell you when Randy Savage passed away in 2011 that he owes it all to two people, Dusty Rhodes and Randy Savage, for who he became. Three people, Dusty Rhodes, Randy Savage, and Jake Roberts, for who he became as a wrestler. So in a way, it was good Savage didn't go back to WWF. But the point is, Savage was forced out. Now, another theory, they don't bring this up. Another theory why Savage was banned from the company and never allowed to come back, besides the scandalous one, is that he had Randy Savage had an endorsement deal with Slim Jim, right? The snack company, beef jerky, right? Snap it to a Slim Jim. Ooh, yeah. He was the spokesperson for them. So when he leaves, they need a new spokesperson. They still want to continue to do business with the WWF, but they need a new spokesperson. So they bring in Kevin Nash for a while, and they bring in Kevin Nash as Diesel was the main wrestler that they were bringing in. But Slim Jim says, no, we're not selling. We want the Macho Man. The Macho Man's now in another company. So Macho Man, as he's leaving, takes the Slim Jim deal, which is millions of dollars. And at this time, Vince is struggling financially. The steroid trial, all this stuff. Ratings are really low. He needs the Slim Jim deal, but Savage just took it away from him, took it out from under him. And people say he never forgave Randy for that. But they don't go into that much. So the point is, all these guys are leaving. They're all going for better contracts because Hulk Hogan brings this up that Turner was offering guaranteed money. Now, this whole thing about guaranteed money is one of the biggest controversies in wrestling because guaranteed money and lesser dates will be one of the things that will entice later on in 1996 Hall and Nash to go to WCW, right? Because Ted Turner was not the one who started giving guaranteed contracts. Jim Crockett was the one that started giving guaranteed contracts when he was in charge of what would become WCW. It was because he couldn't offer the amount of money that Vince McMahon was offering in terms of merchandising deals, because Vince McMahon had connections with all the toy companies, Jakks Pacific and then Hasbro later on. So he couldn't offer that. He couldn't offer T-shirt deals because they didn't have good T-shirt designers. So what he could offer the boys was guaranteed contracts. So that's what he did. I think Luger, like in 88, 89, was one of the first to get one, the Road Warriors. So that was the thing in WCW, even under Jim Crockett. That's probably why he went broke, right? Right? So, but when Ted Turner took over, he started doing it too, and he had the money to do it. He had the money to throw it at everybody, these guarantees. Vince didn't do guarantees. What Vince would do, and he talks about it in the documentary, is he would give opportunity. I don't give guarantees, I give opportunity. So you start off with a base salary. For example, I don't even know back then if they were doing downside guarantees. But anyway, you start off with a base salary. And you have the potential to earn, depending on what you draw, depending on what you sell in merchandise and toys, and you draw at the arenas and you draw on pay-per-views, you have the potential for your contract to increase up and up and up and up with this revenue. You always get that base, but you have the potential to earn much more. So say your base is like 100,000. If your base is 100,000 when you start off, you have the potential to earn up to $2 million if you do well. So it's based on your achievements, your work ethic, your accomplishments. It's similar to how, like in my school, SAE, right, where I'm at now, they give you 100. You start off with 100, and you have the potential to not only keep that 100, but earn several other merits, based on your projects. It incentivizes you. It incentivizes the person to work hard. Like, oh, I could really be something big if I work hard. The problem with Ted Turner and them, the guaranteed money, is that it doesn't incentivize you because you'll always have that big ass bloated contract. And it's based on your notoriety, most likely your notoriety that you achieved in other promotions, namely the WWF. So Hogan's gonna get a big contract because he's Hogan, right? Savage is gonna get a big contract because he's Savage. But what about somebody just starting out? They don't have that chance. Their pay is never going to go up because they're not allowed to draw money. They're not allowed to get over. They're not allowed for their character to become big, right? Because the other guys earn so much more money, right? So they don't have that potential. They are where they are when they started, and they're going to be where they're going to be at when they leave. This is the problem with the up and coming stars that WCW did create, like the Giant, like Chris Jericho. They never saw a pay increase because WCW didn't allow it. There was a ceiling on how much a person at WCW could earn. So to a veteran like Razor Ramon and Diesel, this kind of thing sounds attractive because they already have names, name recognition, name status. But to a newcomer, and we'll see as the documentary progresses, as people decide to jump back from like the younger guys, like I said, like Paul White, like X-Pac, like Chris Jericho, guys that are not as established decide to jump back from WCW to the WWF based on the fact that they have the potential to earn much more in merchandising and all that stuff with the WWF, because the WWF is a better marketing machine than WCW was. WCW was a television company with a wrestling, that owned a wrestling show. WWE was a wrestling show that needed a television company. It's totally different. The primary focus of the WWF and Vince McMahon was wrestling. The primary focus of Ted Turner and WCW was media. Now Turner could have used his media connections in CNN, Cartoon Network, and all this stuff that he was the man in the cable industry in the 1990s to promote WCW, and sometimes he did. But CNN wasn't really down for that because they considered it beneath them. People in the Turner organization considered wrestling beneath them. They always wanted to get rid of WCW. They considered it as the redheaded stepchild. Back in the early 90s, when the ratings were real low, they couldn't wait. Scott Sassa and all those guys couldn't wait to cut WCW out. But Ted Turner never let it go. He was loyal to it because he said, wrestling got me to where I am. Wrestling built the Superstation in the early 70s, and I'm loyal to the wrestling. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to get rid of it. So my point is about guarantees. Vince McMahon didn't give guarantees. He only gave opportunities. So as WCW starts to grow and they come up with Nitro, again, Eric Bischoff repeats the lie. Oh, I told, he goes into Ted Turner's office talking about distribution deals in China, and he goes, Ted Turner says, what do we got to do to compete with WWF? And he goes, 2 hours every Monday night. And then he looks over at Scott Sassa, and Turner says, Sassa, give Eric 2 hours every Monday night. Go head to head with Monday Night Raw, right? It had already been on the air, established for 2 years now. They start that. In the first episode, Luger jumps back. Now, the story with Luger, he had been at SummerSlam. He did a run-in at SummerSlam. Man on a Mission was attacking. It was the WWF title match, Mabel versus Diesel. Man on a Mission, of course, a two-man team, Mo and Mabel, attacking Diesel, jumping Diesel, and Luger comes out to save him. He's part of the Allied Powers. He's teaming with Dave Boy Smith. They open up WrestleMania 11 against the Blue Brothers. You think, he's doing good. He has never won a title. He's had several chances. He wrestled Diesel in 94, twice for the WWF title, and then later in 95, he and Davey Boy went against Owen Hart and Yokozuna for the tag belts. But he never won a title. So his contract is coming up. Now, here's an interesting part in the documentary. Vince McMahon, when he's talking about Luger, Luger's contract is coming up, and he has a handshake deal with Luger that Luger will re-sign the contract and will continue to wrestle for the WWF. Luger now, Vince says, I trusted Luger. Why wouldn't I trust Luger? I never had contracts with these guys. I just had handshake deals. Luger doesn't sign the contract, and through Sting goes to Eric Bischoff and says, well, Lex's contract is available. Eric Bischoff doesn't like Lex Luger. He didn't like working with Lex Luger before. When Luger was in WCW, he felt that Luger was a narcissist, like the name portrays. He was arrogant, conceited, kind of a bully. He didn't want to have Luger back in WCW, but he needed the surprise for the first Nitro. So he lowballs Luger. He gives him the lowest offer that he thinks he can offer, and Luger takes it. But here's Vince standing here looking like a dumbass. You know, he's got his main event. It was supposed to be Lex Luger and Diesel versus Man on a Mission on Raw. And Luger's not there. And he shows up at the Mall of America in Minnesota and interferes with the main event over there, Hulk Hogan versus Big Bubba Rogers. So, but my point is, Vince lies and says, I never had contracts with these guys. I only had handshake deals. It's true that handshake deals were a thing in professional wrestling before contracts. But you know what? Guess who introduced contracts to wrestling? Vincent McMahon introduced contracts to wrestling because he was building a mega promotion. He wasn't just building a territory. Before, in the territory system, somebody like Ernie Ladd, let's say he works for WWA, right? The promotion, Dick the Bruiser promotion based out of Indianapolis, right? And he gets tired of WWA. Then he goes to AWA. Then he gets tired of AWA and goes to Mid-South. Then he gets tired of Mid-South and goes to Mid-Atlantic. Then he gets tired of Mid-Atlantic, he'll go to New York in the WWF. That's the way it was always done. That's why wrestlers in their tax bracket are independent contractors. They're like plumbers. They're like roofers. They're like painters. They're not employees. But Vince McMahon didn't want that happening. He wanted to compete with all these other little smaller mom and pop promotions throughout the country and even the world. So he has signed into exclusive contracts. So he invented contracts. Yes, what he's saying is, but back in the day, wrestlers sufficed on handshake deals. Sometimes they honored them, other times they broke them. Look, for example, Stan Hansen. Stan Hansen was the AWA champion in 1988, and he completely walked out of the company and smashed the belt with his truck to go work in Japan. That kind of thing happened in wrestling, but until Vince McMahon introduced contracts. So for him to say, I'm against contracts, I had handshake deals with these guys in reference to Luger, that's bullshit. Bullshit. I call bullshit because, and they call bullshit in the documentary. Eric Bischoff was there. Eric Bischoff was in the front office in AWA when Vince was doing all this, when Vince was poaching talent, when Vince was taking Vince took in one fell swoop the top heel in AWA, Dr. D. David Schultz, the top babyface in AWA, Hulk Hogan, the top manager in AWA, Bobby Heenan, and the top interviewer in Mean Gene Okerlund. He wiped them out. He would take anybody and everybody. When he went around, he took all the top stars of all the promotions. So say the Junkyard Dog was on top in Louisiana, he would take the Junkyard Dog. Say Roddy Piper was on top in the Carolinas, he'd take Roddy Piper. Say the Funks were on top in their father's territory in Amarillo, he would take them, right? He was like a George Steinbrenner Vince. So he was doing this way before Turner was even in the game. Now Turner's doing it back and he's doing it better, and Vince is bitching and complaining. Like he says this stupid line in the documentary. I never tried to hurt the other guy. I only tried to help myself. And the interviewer pushes back and says, wait a minute, Vince. That's the same thing. Because he was talking about, in reference to not only the predatory practices and the signings to guaranteed contracts, but also like on Nitro will come on a little bit before Raw, especially like when they got a second hour. Because it took Raw years to get a second hour. They didn't get it until like late 97. So Bischoff would come on first. For example, September 11th, 1995, the first time the two companies went head to head. The main event on Raw was Sid versus Shawn Michaels. And the main event on Nitro was Lex Luger versus Hulk Hogan. So what does Eric Bischoff do? He gives away the results, and he makes fun of the super kick. He says that the super kick that Shawn Michaels gives can be earned by a green belt in a local YMCA. So this is the kind of thing he would do. And then people be like, oh, well, I already heard the results on Raw. I don't got to tune into Raw to see what's going to happen. And it worked for a while, but later on in 1999, that shit backfires because he gets Tony Schiavone to do it to Mick Foley. And then people are like, oh, shit, Mick Foley defeats The Rock for the WWF Championship. I want to see that. And they tune out of Kevin Nash versus Hulk Hogan, which ended up being a trick main event anyway. It was the finger poke of doom and the reunion of the NWO. But that's in 1998. We're still here in 1996, 1995, 96. So this is the kind of stuff he was doing. This kind of thing that Vince considered. Now, Vince would never mention Eric Bischoff. He would say that he was head-to-head with Ted Turner, even though Turner really didn't have anything to do with the day-to-day operations of WCW. He just gave him the money to sign these wrestlers. He didn't have anything to do with that. It was all Eric Bischoff. Ted Turner was like the King of England and King Charles, right? And Eric Bischoff was like Keir Starmer. He was like Starmer. You know, Keir Starmer. He was the prime minister, Eric Bischoff. He took care of the day-to-day the way that Keir Starmer takes care of the day-to-day in England and in Great Britain, and King Charles doesn't. Okay? But Vince considered it beneath him to say he competed with a guy like Bischoff. He didn't respect Bischoff, so he always said Turner. Now, Nitro is getting ahead of itself. Nitro is winning because I remember Nitro would always offer the big events. Hulk Hogan versus Lex Luger, a main event we wanted to see in '93 when they were both in WWF together, but they never did it. And they would do these big, the main event players would always be there. On WWF, all we got was jobber matches, right? Like, it was the standard fare, basically, on Raw. Usually. Unless it was like a big one, like when William Shatner came in '94, and they had like Bret Hart versus Jeff Jarrett on one with William Shatner in Hart's Corner. Or sometimes in '94, like one time in '94, July of '94, the 1-2-3 Kid versus Bret Hart, a classic match on that episode of Raw. But usually, no, you didn't get that. So Nitro's doing well in the ratings, but Eric Bischoff has the idea for the NWO. Now many people say, well, he got the idea from Japan. It's true, he got the idea from Japan. What happened in Japan was there was an organization called the UWFI, basically a work shoot promotion, kind of like UFC if UFC was fake, right? And they were in competition with the main promotion, New Japan Pro Wrestling. After Akira Maeda, who founded UWFI, left New Japan Pro Wrestling and exposed New Japan Pro Wrestling as being fake, because the owner of New Japan Pro Wrestling, Antonio Inoki, always prided himself on being and pro wrestling in general, shaping the culture of Japanese wrestling as being more strong style, more real, incorporating more martial arts. I mean, it is Japan, by the way. You know what I mean? So, but Akira Maeda comes out on TV and says, no, that's bullshit. You know what I mean? It's all fake. With UWFI, this is some shoot stuff. Now, eventually, shoot organizations and what was called shoot fighting, which would later be called MMA, would develop in Japan, like Pride, for example. And Pride would be heavily tied to the Yakuza, Japanese organized crime. But anyway, Eric Bischoff is doing business with the Japanese. In fact, they do an angle, New Japan versus WCW for Starrcade 95. So while he's over there, he sees this invasion because UWFI went out of business and was purchased by Antonio Inoki and merged with New Japan Pro Wrestling. So they did an angle where the UWFI guys invade New Japan Pro Wrestling. And Eric Bischoff, a light went off in his head. He's like, I could do that here. Now, Vince McMahon is never going to agree for the WWF and WCW to have an interpromotional massive event, right? That's never going to happen. What I could do is sign a bunch of WWF wrestlers and make a faction out of them that they're all WWF wrestlers invading WCW, just like the UWFI guys were invading New Japan Pro Wrestling. So that's what he does. The face of the WWF New Generation, two of them, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Again, Vince McMahon didn't offer no guaranteed money. WCW did. And those guys, the Clique, they wanted guaranteed money. There's a they don't really talk about this in the documentary, but there's a time at Survivor Series 1994. Shawn Michaels in 1994 was like, while Diesel was Intercontinental Champion for most of the year, Shawn Michaels was on the outside. And all he would do is like deliver super kicks to his opponents, the opponents of Diesel, until they won the tag team championships in August of that year. So anyway, at that Survivor Series, Shawn Michaels does the same thing. He just delivers a super kick, knocks Diesel out. Diesel's on one knee. Diesel turns face. And now they're no longer tag team championships. They're setting up their rivalry for WrestleMania 11. So that's all Shawn Michaels does. So later on, the Clique is already formed. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, 1, 2, 3 Kid, and Triple H wasn't there in November of '94. He would come later. But they're all in the car talking about what they got paid. And Razor Ramon and Diesel, they worked the entire match, and they got half of what Michaels got, and all he did was deliver a super kick. So they call J.J. Dillon up, who was the head of talent relations at that time, and they're like, hey, J.J., what's up with this? And then Vince McMahon gets off the phone talking to J.J. Oh, my God, they're talking. And they increase the pay of Razor Ramon and Diesel. So they were tired of getting jerked around like that. And plus, Diesel, all year he was champion. He wins the title in late 1994 from Backlund. In a matter of seconds, he beats him, right? And he's the champion for the entire year, up until Survivor Series 95 when he drops the belt to Bret Hart. So but he's the lowest drawing champion. He doesn't earn the amount of money that Bret Hart got when he was champion, or that Hogan got when he was champion, or Yokozuna got when he was champion. And he says, why am I the lowest earning WWE? He goes to Gerald Briscoe one day, and he goes, why am I the lowest earning WWF champion in history? He goes, because you're the lowest drawing WWF champion in history. In 1995, the houses were really down badly when Diesel was the champion. He didn't really have great matches either. Like, the great matches he had was with Bret Hart that went to a Broadway at the Royal Rumble, and the other one in Washington, D.C. at the Survivor Series. Like the matches against Sid, the first two in your houses. One was the regular match, one was a lumberjack. Those sucked. The triple header match in which Owen Hart and Yokozuna, the tag team champions, take on him and Shawn Michaels, who have now reunited. All the titles, Intercontinental, WWF, and tag team were on the line. That was a pretty decent match but it was because Shawn Michaels and Owen Hart were in it to bump around. But the match against Mabel at SummerSlam, horrible. SummerSlam 95, probably the worst pay-per-view of all time. If it were not for the ladder match rematch from WrestleMania 10, there's no redeeming qualities on that pay-per-view, Undertaker versus Kama in a casket match for his chain. Oh my God. This was 1995 in the WWF. But anyway, so they're like, we're going to Atlanta to get better paydays. Hall, and through the connection of DDP, was their former manager when they were there before. They get in contact. Hall gets in contact first, and then Kevin Nash. Now they gave their word they're staying. Kevin Nash initially was going to stay. Hall would have stayed if Vince would have just increased his pay or allowed him to go to Japan. He says, "Can you move the decimal to the right? Would the Mcmahon family really miss it?" The Hall family would sure appreciate it. Vince said he couldn't do it, and that was it. Now with Kevin Nash, it's a little bit more complicated. Kevin Nash did give his word that he was staying, but in your house, February of '96, there's a cage match between Bret Hart and Diesel. And the Diesel at the Royal Rumble. Diesel cost the Undertaker his match against Bret Hart, Royal Rumble '96. He interfered and he cost the Undertaker. So the idea is that the Undertaker will do the same thing in the cage match, and he'll come from underneath the ring and drag Diesel to hell. And then Diesel will reemerge with a gray streak in his hair, like you just see the devil himself. But before that happens, he'll have Bret Hart laid out with a jackknife powerbomb ready to climb the cage, right? So, but Bret Hart doesn't want to do it. Bret Hart is like, nah, how does that make me better? And then Undertaker goes, motherfucker, it's not about you. It's about making our match better at WrestleMania 12. So once that happens, Kevin Nash is like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to Atlanta too. So he says, he tells Hall, call Bischoff on the phone. I'll be there too. Memorial Day, they get to the curtain call. Now, what the curtain call is it's infamous among wrestling fans. It's May 19th, 1996 was the date. And the main event was Diesel, who was now a heel, a full-fledged heel. He turned semi-heel when he powerbombed Bret Hart after losing the title at Survivor Series, but he was still teaming with Shawn Michaels. He was still coming to Shawn Michaels' aid and everything. But it's not until right before WrestleMania 12 that they're in a tag match, Diesel and Shawn Michaels against The Undertaker and Bret Hart, that Diesel hits Shawn Michaels with a chair. So after the Iron Man match, after Shawn Michaels becomes the champion, achieves his boyhood dream, 60 minutes in the ring with Bret Hart, Anaheim, California, WrestleMania 12. The next, Shawn Michaels' first title defense is going to be against Diesel, good friends, better enemies. And they have a hell of a match in Omaha, Nebraska. And that's, they use, I think it's Mad Dog Vachon or Butcher Vachon, one of them. I think it's Mad Dog. They use his prosthetic leg in the match because there's no disqualification. So, but they go around the horn. That was April. They go around the horn, and finally in May, they have their final blow-off in a cage. And they have the cage match, Madison Square Garden, for the first sellout in years. And they go to Vince in the back. They say, Vince, Kevin and Scott are leaving the next night to go to WCW. Can we do something as a send-off? Can we like, let them know how much we'll miss them? Earlier in the night, Razor Ramon took on Hunter Hearst Helmsley in the mid-card. And Vince, not knowing what they're going to do, says, sure, go ahead and do it if that's what you want to do. If this is important to you, it's important to me. Right? So they have the match, super kick, Diesel's laid out. Coming down the aisle is Triple H, or Hunter Hearst Helmsley at that time, a Connecticut blue blood heel. Embraces Shawn Michaels. Then coming right behind him is Razor Ramon embracing Triple H. And then Kevin Nash is still laid out. So, like Sleeping Beauty, Shawn Michaels goes over them, kisses Kevin Nash, And Kevin Nash rises up, and they all four shake hands, hugging in the ring. Missing was the 1-2-3 Kid, who was the fifth member of the clique. But the point is, two are heels, Diesel and Triple H, and two are baby faces, Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. This breaks wrestling convention right in the home of the WWF, right in Madison Square Garden. Now, it was a house show. It wasn't live, but somebody on a camcorder at that time recorded it, and you can hear the guy in the background screaming, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" And people in the audience are livid. People in the audience the backstage people are pissed because these people, Bruce Pritchard, Pat Patterson, Gerald Briscoe, Jim Cornette, Jim Ross, they come from the old school of wrestling where that wasn't done in their territories. They came up under Bill Watts. They came up under Paul Bosch. They came up under Eddie Graham. They came up under, Jerry Jarrett. All these old school promoters that when they would have shows, heels and babyface had to be in separate locker rooms. Vince McMahon never went that far. Vince McMahon actually in front of the New Jersey State Athletic Commission in 1989, before that, admitted that the wrestling business was fake. But that was in front of the New Jersey State Athletic Commission. That wasn't, in front of a wrestling crowd. And they demanded something be done. So the something that had to be done was that somebody had to be punished. And that somebody was Triple H, because he was the lowest on the totem pole. Shawn Michaels was the champion, and everybody else was leaving. Vince didn't really want to do it because, again, he didn't really care about kayfabe. He says that kayfabe is antiquated, and then they show Triple H and Shawn Michaels basically saying the exact same thing, that kayfabe is an antiquated thing, but somebody had to be punished because the pressure was on Vince. So Triple H was slated to win the King of the Ring that year in '96 and get the spot that Stone Cold Steve Austin eventually got. Doesn't, and has to lose to the likes of Duke the Dumpster Trotsy and Henry Godwin in these heavy gimmick matches, like a hog pin match, for example. Really, and put over Ahmed Johnson a hell of a lot. And it's not until '97, when it's all blown over, that he starts to get his win back, and he actually does win the King of the Ring in '97 from Mankind. So now Razor Ramon, aka Scott Hall, premieres in WCW. He says, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here." It's a match with Mike Enos and Steve Dahl. Mike Enos, of course, Beverly Brothers fame. Steve Dahl from the tag team Well Done, that was in WWF in the early '90s. This was supposed to be a showcase for the Mauler, and Mike Enos' character, being the new protege of Colonel Rob Parker. But forget that. Scott Hall comes down the audience and says, "You want a war? You're going to get it." And he mentions the Billionaire's Kid. He references the Billionaire Ted skits. Now, they talk about the Billionaire Ted skits. What are the Billionaire Ted skits? In retaliation to what Eric Bischoff is doing on WCW TV, WWE has the idea, and they'll come up with a series of sketches lampooning Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan, the Billionaire Ted's Wrestling War Room. And they do, and it's funny, and it will culminate in a free-for-all, free-show match between the Huckster and the Macho Man, with Billionaire Ted as the referee. I like the one where he says, "I bought old movies, I bought old cartoons, I even bought old wrestlers." Mm-hmm. But Kay Kalpovitz, who's the head of USA Network, she doesn't like it. She wants to be put a stop to it. Ted Turner likes it. They showed Ted Turner laughing at it. Hulk Hogan loved it. You know what I mean? But Kay Kalpovitz of USA Network doesn't like it, so they have to shut it down. Especially when it got real serious, when they accused Ted Turner of using lithium, right? And they talking about steroid abuse, how rich that is, right? 2 years removed from the steroid trial, it's Vince making fun of other promotions allowing wrestlers to use steroids. So, but when Scott Hall comes out, he references these skits. He calls Mean Gene Scheme Gene. He calls the Macho Man the Nacho Man. He calls Hulk Hogan the Huckster. You know what I mean? So it makes it seem like they're from WWF. Then Kevin Nash comes out. They're the outsiders. They challenge three WCW guys, Luger, Sting, and Macho Man, to a match. And Hulk Hogan turns heel, basically going through the exact same thing. We all know that Hulk Hogan was hesitant. Hulk Hogan was getting booed in different arenas. He actually been getting booed since he debuted in WCW in '94. But 2 years later, he was getting booed a hell of a lot. Probably because of the storylines he was in. I mean, look at that Tower of Doom match on Uncensored '96, where they brought Debo back and they had the Final Solution guy. That was horrible, man. Like, and he saw somebody else getting traction in WCW, like Brian Pillman, and he wanted to immediately bury him. So Hogan, people were tired of his act. Bash at the Beach '96, he turns heel, right? The NWO forms. Now, for fear of losing, we went over this in other videos. Basically, they don't, like I said, they don't mention anything new. For fear of losing other wrestlers, namely Bret Hart, whose contract's up, Vince signed him to a 20-year deal. And then a year or so into it, at the end of '97, Vince decides he can't afford it. So now he's in a conundrum. Bret is his champion after SummerSlam '97, beating The Undertaker. And he wants the belt to be put on Shawn Michaels, but Bret doesn't like Shawn Michaels because of personal issues, mostly because he got on live TV and they were hyping their King of the Ring match that was supposed to happen, their King of the Ring '97. He says that Bret Hart had sunny days, and Julie Hart, Bret's wife, says, what are you, fucking sunny? And then they get into an altercation. Shawn Michaels walks out, says it's an unsafe working environment, threatens to go to WCW, doesn't, comes back as the referee for that Undertaker match in '97, and he cost Bret Hart. Then him and Undertaker have their Hell in a Cell qualifying match. Kane comes out, costs the Undertaker, and then we head to Survivor Series where the ScrewJob happens. And we know the story of the ScrewJob. Vince told them that it would be a schmaz. DX and the Hart Foundation would get into it, and then he'll be allowed to give up the title on Raw the next night. It doesn't happen. He says, ring the bell, ring the fucking bell, and Mr. McMahon is born. And that's basically all they talk about in this episode. The beginnings of the Monday Night Wars. The real beginnings of the Monday Night Wars. Vince's steroid trial, the downfall of WWF. This episode was really boring. Again, because this stuff, not that everybody knows this stuff, but this stuff wrestling fans have known for the last 30 years. I mean, many of us, and the stuff they'll talk about in the next episode, the Attitude Era, the beginnings of the Attitude Era. They don't have Vince Russo on the show, so they can't include him, and he's a crucial part of the Attitude Era. Without him, there is no Attitude Era, in my opinion. You know what I mean? He was the one that slammed the Raw magazine on the desk. That Vince McMahon yelled at, slamming the Raw magazine on his desk, saying, what the hell is this? Because he mentioned WCW in the magazine. The one with Steve Austin's busted lip from the match with Mark Merrill at King of the Ring '96. And he says, this is what the television program has to be. They have the horrible show in Germany. It was headlined by Owen Hart versus the British Bulldog for the European title final match. It sucked. It was so bad that nobody watched it. Immediately he becomes the head writer the next day, and that's when the Attitude Era officially begins in the latter part of 1997. I'm sure they'll bring up the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin when he wins the title at WrestleMania 14 in his feud with Vince McMahon. And when Mr. McMahon becomes a character and starts wrestling, especially St. Valentine's Day Massacre, 1999 in a cage match against Austin. They'll bring all that up, I'm sure in the next one. I haven't watched it, and then the fall of that, The Rock going to Hollywood and Austin's injury and Austin almost dying at WrestleMania 19, and then the ruthless aggression era with Cena coming in and all that. They still have to talk about Owen Hart's death. That's another thing I didn't get to. Owen Hart's death, the ruthless aggression era, and then Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit WrestleMania 20, and the death of Chris Benoit in 2007, along with the Battle of the Billionaires. I didn't get to that either. The Battle of the Billionaires. Trump versus Vince. Trump choosing his guy, just like with the Cyndi Lauper thing. Trump choosing his guy, Bobby Lashley, and Vince choosing his guy, Umaga. And Vince gets his head shaved, which leads to him wearing a do-rag later in the year, right? And becoming the ECW champion. And eventually his death, the end of the year. The Sopranos had gone off the air that year in 2007, and the Sopranos, fans of the Sopranos, wanted James Gandolfini, the main character, Tony Soprano, to die. It doesn't. What David Chase ends up doing is the Sopranos are sitting in a restaurant and it just goes to black. So what Vince wanted to do is, I'll give you the death the Sopranos didn't give you. He goes into a limo and the limo blows up. It was supposed to be that his kayfabe son, Mr. Kennedy, aka Ken Anderson, kills him in order to take over the company as he wins the Money in the Bank at WrestleMania 23 and becomes WWF champion, beating John Cena for the WWF championship. That doesn't happen because Cena gets injured. And then the whole Mr. McMahon death angle has to be called off because as they're ready to have the fake funeral for Mr. McMahon, they find out that Chris Benoit really died. So I'm hearing a lot in this part of the documentary. Stone Cold Steve Austin says that he doesn't believe in CTE. And Vince said he don't believe in CTE, that the wellness policy was all bullshit after Eddie Guerrero died, the heart attack in 2005, and then after Benoit. So I didn't get to that part yet, so I'm not going to speak about it. I hear part 6 is pretty crazy too. We go into like his relationship with Shane, because Shane, of course, leaving the company in 2008. And not coming back for 8 years. And during that time, Triple H becomes the heir apparent. Triple H, I'm sure they'll talk about the Stephanie McMahon test angle in '99, where Triple H drugs Stephanie McMahon and they get married, and because of that, they start to work together on camera. And Triple H cheats on Chyna, and Triple H and Stephanie develop a real life relationship. After Stephanie McMahon turns heel on her father in Armageddon 1999 and becomes the $1 Billion Princess character, a tremendous character. The character got old after a while, especially during the Authority years. But in the beginning, the $1 Billion Princess character, like when DX was heel in 2000, that character was cool. I'm sure they'll talk about how The Rock became a huge star. Him and the Nation of Domination initially, and then becoming a huge star. The Swerve at Survivor Series 1998, I'm sure they'll talk about. The Rock and Hogan. Hogan comes back to the company in 2002 with the NWO, and how that's a bust because Hall got fired and Kevin Nash tore his quad. And by the time Kevin Nash comes back in 2003, he's just a singles wrestler. There's no more NWO. So I'm sure they don't mention Brock Lesnar. No mention of Brock Lesnar because of the controversy with Brock. Like writing Brock out of the history of the WWE, especially during this period, is crazy because when he defeats The Rock at SummerSlam 2002, he at that time he becomes the youngest WWF or WWE champion in history. Right? 2 years later, they break that record when Randy Orton defeats Benoit at the same event. But Brock took the Undertaker streak, which they haven't talked about in 2014. They haven't talked about. I haven't gotten to that point yet, right? Brock left professional wrestling in 2004 in one of the worst matches in history against Goldberg, and then he goes first to the NFL, gets signed to the Minnesota Vikings, and then leaves the NFL and goes to the UFC, and within less than a year defeats Randy Couture, becoming the UFC champion. And becomes the biggest box office draw in UFC history to that point, until Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor come in later in the 2010s. But of the 2000s, Brock was the biggest draw in the UFC's history. His matches with Frank Mir, his matches with Shane Carwin, and of course the ones he lost with Alistair Overeem and Cain Velasquez. But the two companies are merged now, but neither side can talk about Brock Lesnar. And not to mention, UFC UFC 200, where he comes back to the UFC after being gone for like 3 or 4 years, and he fights Mark Hunt, while at the same time fighting Randy Orton at SummerSlam 2016. Like, Brock has so much history, guys, but he's written out of it because of this bullshit. They're not going to talk. The Shooting Star Press, the match against Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 19. Who doesn't know that? Who doesn't talk about it? That's a tremendous moment in WWE history. Winning 2 Royal Rumbles, 2003 and 2022 respectively. Nobody talks about it. Beating Kofi Kingston on the first SmackDown on Fox in 2019, ending Kofi Kingston's run, ending Big E's run, ending Bobby Lashley's, beating every black champion. But now this is what he's reduced to. But I don't know what they're going to talk about. I know they ain't going to talk about Brock Lesnar, so I'm not even going to qualify that. Katie Vick, I don't know if they'll talk about that. You know what I mean? That's one of the more embarrassing things that happened during the ruthless aggression era. Triple H dressed as Kane making love to a corpse. The proposed incest angle between Stephanie McMahon and Vince McMahon in 2006. The mocking of religion when he was in the feud with Shawn Michaels, where they had a handicap match at Vengeance, Shawn Michaels teaming with God versus Vince and Shane. I don't know if they'll talk about it. I haven't gotten into that late in the game, the 2000s. But anyway, it's a pretty good documentary, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.